As another school year gets underway, a lot of families are thinking about more than just school supplies and busy schedules. They're also asking bigger questions about the future, such as how do we prepare for the cost of education, and what role do we want to play in helping the next generation succeed? The education landscape keeps changing. Parents and grandparents are weighing rising costs, shifting career paths, and questions about what higher education might look like years from now. At the same time, 529 plans and other education savings tools have become more flexible, but many people still don't realize all the options available to them. To help us unpack some of these questions, I'm joined by lead advisor Ryne Oller. Ryne works closely with families as they navigate education planning and make decisions that align with what's most important to them. His experience and knowledge in this area of planning make him the perfect guest for today's conversation. We'll talk about education saving strategies, clear up some common misconceptions about the 529 plans, and share practical ways to talk about this topic with loved ones. The goal is to support both your financial plan and the values you want to pass on to your family. Ryne, thank you for joining me today. Let's start with the big picture. Why has education planning become an important topic for so many families today?
I think the short answer is it's expensive. So a lot of my clients are in their 30s or their 40s, and when you look at the cost of college specifically, it was on a rapid incline from 1995 to 2015. And actually, 2015 is about when it peaked, when we're talking about inflation-adjusted cost for that. And so if you graduated from 2005 to 2015, you're probably 33 to 43 years old. So you're firmly a millennial, and you're in your main family formation years here. So you're either starting to have young children, or they're starting to get into middle school, and you're starting to ask a really big question of, what do we want education for college, perhaps, or even high school to look like, and then how do we fund that? And I think there's some scars because of that generation, what they graduated with. So if you actually look at annual debt borrowed, inflation adjusted, it peaked in 2011. So I actually graduated in 2010. So I was straight into the labor force right there out of college at the peak of the borrowing. And so we came into the working force just understanding how heavy that debt burden can be. And I think there's just a question of like, is this a good ROI or not? Is the path as traditional as it used to be with planning for college and upskilling your children and getting them into the workforce or not? So there's just some big questions, some scars, some warranted baggage that comes from that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I hear so many more people focusing on the cost, and you mentioned ROI, return on investment. That has not always been part of the conversation when people were talking about post-grad, opportunities.
I think historically the path was very traditional: go to college, get a 4-year degree, go into the labor market, and it's all going to take care of itself. And I think in certain spots in the economy that hasn't been the case. There's been a lot of debt that people have that they didn't even quite understand before they got into it. And so there's just some baggage that comes with that. And so as I'm working through these conversations with my clients, just the big question is this worth it or not? And there's a lot of ifs around it. Like, what if my child doesn't go to college? Or what if they get a scholarship? What if AI changes everything? What if, just the landscape totally changes? Then how do I approach that? So they're all fair concerns. And I think, with some good planning and some good tools to use, I think we can work around that.
That's a great point. We've talked about some of the numbers already as far as cost, but maybe even before families get to the numbers, how do they even start thinking about education planning?
Yeah, I think it has to start with family values. What are your goals as a family? Is education valuable to them or not? And they need to start with that, and then they need to kind of back into, okay, how do we fund that? So a lot of times there's just a lot of misinformation out there, just a lot of information. It's hard to know what's the right thing to do. I think it just needs to start with a conversation at home around what do we want for our children long term.
And what do you think is the right age to start that conversation with children?
That's a tough one. I think that a lot of millennials went into college and then came out of college never having that conversation at all. and just assuming, hey, this is all going to work out, I'm going to pay it off, and just having no real sense of the numbers at all. And so I think there's some baggage with that. So I think that there needs to be some education, but I think you want to be really careful about not dangling a carrot in front of a child that maybe there is a different path for them. You don't want to force them unnecessarily down a path just because they know that this money is there. And I think that's child dependent at the end of the day. You need to know your child. You need to know what motivates them. You need to understand, again, just your family priorities and values, and then work from there.
Yeah. So do you think it's important when a child becomes a teenager that there's eventually some awareness of maybe what funds might be available for their college education, specifically if they're going to be asked to fund some of their own education?
Yeah, I think there does need to be a conversation around that. I think there needs to be a conversation of not all educational paths are created equal. They don't have the same outcome. So doing a 2-year degree versus a 4-year degree is different. Also, going to med school is a lot different than any one of those two. Also, what kind of degree you get has different outcomes as well. And so you want to be thoughtful with how you're approaching that conversation, helping them understand that the specialty or the degree that they're getting can have very different outcomes. And that's hard. That's a hard conversation to have. I don't know that anyone's going to do that perfectly or super well, but what you want to start to do is just, you want to start educating your child as much as you can. Again, I'd be very careful about incentivizing them in the wrong direction because of just some amount of money being there.
Yeah, you don't want to influence their choice unintentionally, right?
Yeah.
With the funding. So what I'm hearing you say is that communication is key as you start to think about your approach to education planning. If we go back to the numbers, is there a right number to save? And maybe what's the best way to save?
There's not a perfect number. And that's where we spend a lot of time talking with our clients about how do we form a plan with imperfect information down the road. We don't know exactly how our children are going to be gifted, what is the cost going to be. So how do we plan around that? That's a really hard thing to do. So when we're talking about college specifically, a lot of times the 529 plan comes into the picture. And that's basically an IRA for educational spending. So it's a tax advantaged account that you put money into. You can pull it out for education. It's a really good tool to use. What I see a lot is concern around dollars going into that and then it not getting spent, which I think is a fair one because of just all the ifs that we've already talked about. I think, though, if you have that conversation as a family around what is priority, what's value, what are our values and our goals, and education is a part of it, the 529 should be a tool that you have at your disposal. And the reason for that is just the tax advantages are pretty large. And so if you invested $100 a month from the time that your child was born for the next 18 years, you invested it and you earn stock market-like return, say 7% per year on average, what you'd have at the end of those 18 years is about $43,000 in that account from $100 a month. And of that $43,000, about half would be what you originally contributed, half would be the gains and the growth and the income that you earned. And if we just, okay, how much is that going to buy someone for college? It's going to buy probably about a year, maybe a little bit more than a year's worth of in-state public university. So that $100 for many of our clients is a good starting point for them to go after, and it gets them in the game. It gets them saving for their education in a tax advantaged way. Then do we do more than that? It's just really going to depend on each family's goals. But that is one tool that you can start to build very early. And it just offers a lot of tax benefits that make sense for a family that does want to do that.
Yeah, I love your example about how the discipline each month can go a long way. And it also really illustrates the time value of money. Let's talk about 529s again. And maybe what are some of the misunderstandings when it comes to this particular vehicle?
I think the biggest misunderstanding is that it can be used only in a very narrow way. Most commonly, people think it's only for like a 4-year college, but it's much broader than that. You can use it for a 2-year school, graduate school, trade school, vocational programs, K through 12. It's a really versatile account. And even after all of that, if there's money left over in an account, the account owner could change the beneficiary. So Sibling one has money left over, they could repurpose it to sibling two. It could be passed on down to the next generation even. There's just a lot of different ways the account can get used. I think the bottom line on that, the reason for that is that the government's trying to incentivize people putting money in and funding their education. They're kind of dangling these tax benefits and these features in front of them so that it motivates them enough to do it. I just don't know that enough people understand how flexible the account actually is.
Yeah, those are all such great points. And another thing, too, is we now have this Roth IRA rollover provision. And so how are people thinking differently about 529s because of that?
Yeah, that's a relatively new feature that's been added in the last 2 or 3 years. And that is, again, just the government trying to get people off the sidelines and into the game of saving and investing for their children's education. So many of my conversations are just stuck around this idea of like, what if money is left over? And so the government knows that. And what they've done is up to $35,000 that's left over in a 529 can be rolled over to the same beneficiary's Roth IRA. And that I've seen that really move the needle for a lot of my clients. That's helped kind of alleviate some of the concerns they have around contributing to a 529 and having money left over. It's a really cool way of getting tax advantages at the beginning potentially and at the end and repurposing money for their children long term. And so I think the 529 is really versatile in ways that maybe a lot of people don't understand. And it's a tool that, in my experience, is a little underutilized.
Mm-hmm. I really took it from being an education planning tool only to retirement and maybe even generational wealth passing tool. And so let's bring the grandparents into the conversation now. What if there's grandparents that want to help contribute to their grandchildren's education? What are the different ways that they can get involved?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a good point on not is it just education planning, retirement planning, but it's estate planning. So when you put money into a 529, it actually comes out of that person's estate, meaning it's excluded from that person's estate. And so for certain families, that could be really interesting around managing their estate and managing the taxes that could come from their estate. And I've seen many grandparents be very interested in getting money down to the next, not just the next generation, but generations beyond. And that's a really efficient way at doing education, retirement, and estate planning all at the same time. There's a lot of tax benefits associated with all of those. And so a grandparent could open up a 529, and it could be for the benefit of their grandchild. They could certainly do it that way. Or if the parent has a 529 already for the grandchild, their kid, then the grandparent could put money into the parent's 529. And there's some reasons why you may or may not do that. I think basically it comes down to how much control and visibility do you want the parent's generation having into that money. But whether it's contributing directly into the parent's 529 for the child or creating their separate 529, they can do it all the same. There's just some different reasons why you do one over the other.
Yeah, so it really does give it a lot of flexibility. And, we talk a lot about how giving generationally is not just being done at the reading of the will anymore, right? The grandparents could get a lot of joy out of maybe helping their grandchildren fund some of their education expenses while they're alive, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so back to just kind of what's misunderstood about a 529 is just how far the 529s can reach. So it's not just an account for your children. It could be for grandchildren, nephews, nieces, brother, sister. There's just a wide range. And I've seen many grandparents be in a financial position where they have some abundance and they have this generosity that they want to lean into. And the 529 is a way to give to that to future generations. There's tax benefits associated with it, of course, and those are meaningful, but it's just another way for them to manage their estate and to accomplish their personal goals.
All right. Well, we started out talking about cost, and so I do want to bring it back to inflation. How do you advise people to incorporate the rising cost of education into their financial plan, and maybe what is the status of that at this point?
And the first thing is that college is expensive, for sure. There is a price tag that's pretty substantial into the future that we need to keep in mind. I think what's interesting that most people don't understand, though, is that college inflation's actually come down quite a bit. So while the price tag that you're paying is still high, and feels high because it is high, the actual cost or the rise of that has slowed. especially relative to other things in the economy. And so when we look at on an inflation adjusted basis, the cost of a 4-year public in-state school, it's actually decreased over the last 10 years, which is really surprising to a lot of people. The bad side of that is it's still relatively expensive. It's a substantial investment, but I think people are surprised by that and should feel good on the fact that we did have some really hot inflation around college for a couple of decades. For the last decade, it has stagnated. So we need to plan for it. It is a significant investment. And again, I think it just comes back to having a plan and having the right tools and investment strategies for that.
Mm-hmm. That is an interesting fact. And it's also very good to hear, especially as a parent of 2 college students and a high school student at the moment. So thank you for joining us today. Are there any last words of advice you want to leave the listeners?
So I think the biggest thing I want to leave, and I've kind of already talked about it, is just having a plan for it. There's a lot of what ifs, and it's really easy to get stuck in this loop of what if, and a bunch of hypotheticals. And I think that the earlier you start, the better. Having diversification and a number of tools that you have around how you're going to approach this is helpful. You don't want to approach it from like an all or nothing. Like a 529 plan, for example, it doesn't have to be the only tool that you use to plan for college. You can use other investment accounts. You can use other strategies to solve for this, but it should be, if you do have that intent to help your children go to college, it should be a tool that's at your disposal. And it doesn't take a lot to have some meaningful tax benefits come from the 529. So I think you got to start with the conversation of the hard work of what's our values, what's our priorities, what's our goals, and then put some action together around moving forward and starting to invest and save for the future.
Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing some of your wisdom on this topic. It's really helpful.
You bet. Thank you.
One thing that really stands out is that education planning isn't about having all the answers. It's about being thoughtful about your options. None of us know exactly what education will look like years from now or what it'll cost, but there are steps families can take today that create flexibility for the future. Whether you're saving for a young child, helping a teenager think about what's next, or wondering how grandparents can be part of the conversation, having a plan can bring a lot of clarity and confidence. And the truth is, there's no one-size-fits-all approach. What works for one family may look very different for another, and that's perfectly okay. If you'd like to talk through your own goals and how education planning fits in the broader financial picture, we'd love to continue the conversation. Visit us at fostergrp.com to learn more about or connect with our team. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.